Welcome back, or welcome to the UN World Development Forum 2021, and thanks for participating in this session TA2.12, in which we will discuss integrating citizen science into official SDG monitoring mechanisms. Just one sec, sorry, I've got some. The session is brought to you by the International Institute of the Applied Systems Analysis, World Health Organization, UN National Convention on Biological Diversity, Sustainable Development Solution Network, and the Global Citizen Science Partnership. My name is Grant Cameron, and I'm the moderator of this session and the director of SDSN TReNDS, a global research network with a focus on connecting innovators across data domains to improve data production and use for sustainable development. For those of you who are not familiar, citizen science refers to public participation in scientific research. Even though a wide variety of definitions are used to describe the term citizen science, they all encompass three main components: public participation, voluntary contributions, and knowledge production. Citizen science initiatives are vital to measuring sustainable development in two ways. First, the data produced by these initiatives expand the information available to us to measure and track development performance, perhaps in hard-to-reach regions or as complements to traditional data sources. Second, and to me, perhaps more importantly, citizen science initiatives create new types of relationships between individuals, civil society, and public institutions. Citizen science initiatives are profoundly collaborative when crafting and executing strategies for monitoring, auditing, planning, and decision-making. And this co-creation approach helps build trust and legitimacy in government institutions. Ghana is a great case study of this collaborative approach, and we'll be highlighting this later in the session. Along with country examples, the session will introduce the Global Citizen Science Partnership, a network of networks that seeks to promote and advance citizen science for a sustainable world. In this session, we'll hear from 5 panelists on their experiences and perceptions on the value of citizen science for development. They are Gillian Campbell, Head of Monitoring, Reviewing, and Reporting at the UN Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Kwame Fridia, Environmental Economist at the Government of Ghana's Environmental Protection Agency, Rachel Bowers, ODI Fellow working at the Ghana Statistical Service, Steve McFeely, Director of Data and Analytics at the World Health Organization, and Dilek Fraisl, Research Scholar, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. Before we start turning to the real action of this session, I just want to encourage those of you who are participating in the audience, if you wish to post a question, we will try and address it as best we can. Please post it in the conference app. So the WAHOVA app that you've probably all got loaded and are glued to with every second during this convention is where we're going to be looking for your question. Before we start the panel, we begin with some opening remarks from Albert von Jaarsveld, Director General of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. So let me hand it over to you now, Albert.
Thank you, Grant. Can we get the slideshow up, please, if possible? Thank you.
Now.
Right, thank you very much. I'm just going to, as Grant indicated, give you a bit of an introduction. I think as already shared with everybody, citizen science is about public participation in scientific research and knowledge production. And it's about really sharing observations around biodiversity issues, litter issues from different parts of the world, water and air quality observations, and also issues around social observations in terms of violence, identifying living conditions and areas of extreme poverty and so on. So I think it's also important just to remind everybody that we're talking about scientific research that can be led by researchers themselves. In other words, strictly hypothesis-driven research where We have volunteers of people that collect data and contribute to data collection, but we also have the idea of co-creation. And I think it's really important where citizen scientists can get involved in the research itself, get involved in the design of the research and the carrying out of the observations that are required at the end of the day. So this idea of empowering the citizenry to understand science, to engage with science, to help us democratize science. In other words, to make sure that people understand the process and the benefits it brings to society. There are a number of examples that you're going to encounter today, but I think the most important thing is that already citizen science is contributing to significant scientific outputs. And the idea that up to 33% or some 76 indicators from the SDGs can be assisted with using citizen science approaches. And I think this is really important for us to understand that we can really complement the other data collecting efforts and to fast track our understanding of what's happening in the SDG landscape. So with those few words, I look forward to the presentations, and I look forward to hearing a little bit about the Global Citizen Science Partnership, which you'll hear about later in the session. So with those few words, Grant, back to you.
Follow-up question, that was a great slide. For the Global Citizen Science Partnership to truly engage and enable SDG monitoring and other international frameworks and agreements, what kind of support does it need? And from where does this support need to come from?
Well, I think clearly it requires support from international organizations and government agencies at the end of the day, because I think if the data are not going to be used and not going to be assimilated and not being applied to resolving some of the community issues and problems that we have, then I think we're falling short of the mark. So some top-down support is very welcome and hopefully will encourage people to participate. But at the same time, we also need community leaders to take the lead and to help us move forward. That sometimes requires some funding support as well, so let's just be honest and upfront about that. But I think many of the key funding agencies at the end of the day can help oil the wheels of citizen science engagements across the board.
Great, thanks very much. Great answer. All right, now we're going to move to our panelists, and our first panelist who's going to take us through her perspective is Jillian. Over to you, Jillian.
Thank you. And can't see if the slides are up or not. So I'll just, I don't know if the slides are up, so maybe somebody can. Thanks, I can see it now. So we all know that there are data gaps in terms of collecting the SDG indicator. We have data gaps in terms of our ability to monitor at the frequency we want, at the locations that we want, at the granularity that we want. And there's a tremendous funding gap that is going to, that inhibits our ability to just go out and measure everything that we want to measure using traditional means. And so I think this is why the issue of citizen science has been gaining so much traction. When I attended the World Data Forum back in Cape Town, there was very little talk about citizen science. Even talking about other forms of new data was just something that was starting to take off. And in the time since then, in the last 5 years, we've seen a tremendous shift where I think that more and more statisticians are interested in trying to find a way to use these new data sources, including citizen science, so that we can fill the gaps that we have in terms of monitoring the SDGs and have better information going forward. But because this is a new area, there are still issues in terms of how exactly do we fill these gaps. And so I wanted to just start with a slide that shows some research that was actually also shown by the previous speaker in terms of where do we get this figure that 33% of the SDG indicators could be monitored using citizen science. So what the group of people who were involved in that paper did, led by Fraisl, who's from IIASA, and a group of us together, we went through and we looked at every single SDG indicator, and we tried to map existing citizen science initiatives that have data that could contribute to the monitoring of these different indicators. So it's not theoretical, where could citizen science fit in? It's actually, there are existing citizen science efforts that could be already leveraged to contribute to 33% of the SDGs. And what the figure's shown here, or what the figure is showing here, is that for some of the indicators shown in green in those little pie charts, there is already citizen science that's contributing. This includes for the key protected or key biodiversity area indicators, we have citizen science contributing, and for a few others. And then the yellow is showing us where citizen science could be contributing. And so if you add those together, that is the 33% that I'm talking about. And I just wanted to mention also that there are particular opportunities across some of the SDGs. You can see for SDG 3 and 6 and 15 and 14 and 11, that there's a lot of opportunity here to fill these gaps. And of course, these are a lot of the environmental SDGs. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of measuring the SDGs, there are these opportunities to better use citizen science. But what I wanted to mention quickly is, from my perspective, working at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity and showing some additional research that we've done, when we look at how many of the SDG indicators actually have to do with the state of the environment, it's quite a small number of SDG indicators, as you can see on the chart on the right. And so even though we are getting more and more data availability by goal, which is shown in the 2021 SDG report, we're not actually measuring some of the things that tell us about the health of the planet. We're more measuring the enabling conditions and the policy that we need in order to protect our environment, but not actually tracking this outcome level state of the planet. And so if you go to the next slide, in the lead up to the, I don't know, we can go to the next slide. It says, what's the global biodiversity framework? This one, yeah. In the lead up to the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention of Biological Diversity, there is a post-2020 global biodiversity framework that's being negotiated and will be adopted at this Conference of the Parties meeting, which will be happening next year. And this does then specifically look at what are the activities that we need in order to protect our planet and to protect its biological resources, including the drivers of change, pollution, linking to the Climate Change Convention, putting in place policies that protect areas and improve sustainable land use and marine spatial planning. So it's those sorts of issues. What are those actually activities that we need, but also what are the outcomes that we want? How do we better measure ecosystem services? How do we measure the connectivity and health of natural ecosystems, including the species within those ecosystems? And so I think that I just wanted to conclude by saying, if you go to the next slide, that in addition to the SDGs, there are still measures that we need in terms of understanding our planet, in terms of understanding the natural resources that we have. And citizen science is even better positioned, actually, to measure some of these indicators that will actually tell us on what the health of the planet is. And these could then complement the SDG indicators as well. And so I think that the only way forward for us to measure the things that we need to measure, for us to really understand the world around us, we do need to find a way to bring these new data sets in, or existing data sets in, so that we're in a position to really know what we need to know. Thank you. Back to you, Grant.
Thanks a lot, Jillian. Very helpful graphics. One quick follow-up question. From your perspective, what could be the role of this new global citizen science partnership in addressing the challenges you highlighted? And are there plans for CBD and UNEP to work with this partnership? I think you're muted.
Sorry. I think that one of the key challenges that we have in the analysis that's shown on the first slide is that the citizen science data is everywhere. You know, you have an individual citizen science project that sets up a way to collect data and to monitor, and then that data often is retained within that project. And while it is providing local level information that's being used within the project, it's often not actually being shared in a way that allows others to use it. And there's a lack of ability for people to map it to try to understand how it aligns with local standards. And so I really think that the Citizen Science Global Partnership is going to help us fill this gap in terms of working with individual projects to ensure that the data that's collected can be standardized, can be included in global databases, and also to help work through some of these data governance and infrastructure questions to say, how do we actually then bring all this information together so that governments don't, or UNEP or the CBD, don't have to go to tens of thousands of different projects, but there's a resource that we can use to pull information from a central location. And so, yes, I think this will have tremendous value for the CBD in terms of measuring biodiversity and for UNEP. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thanks already to the audience. We already have 7 questions in the app, so we'll be getting to those in a jiffy. But before we do that, we've sort of heard from a kind of a top-down perspective from Jillian, and now we're going to pivot and really sort of dig into one country case study. And for that, we're going to turn to our colleagues from Ghana. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel, who I think is going to take us through a quick presentation. And then I think I have a couple of questions for Kwame afterwards. So over to you.
Thanks, Grant. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm joined today by my colleague, Kwame Fujua from the Ghana Environmental Protection Agency. And we're going to be talking about Ghana's flagship citizen science program, which is Citizen Science for the SDGs. So as a National Statistics Office, our interest in citizen methodologies came out of a policy engagement in 2017 called the Data Roadmap Forum, which was supported by the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. This forum assessed what steps Ghana needed to take in order to meet the data needs of reporting on the SDGs. And we came out with several priorities, including strengthening the entire data ecosystem, exploring new data types, and increasing data utilization. And the project that we're talking about today meets all of these priorities by activating citizens in direct data collection activities to monitor marine plastic pollution, which is an area of particular policy interest in Ghana. So we started working with the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis after reading the research that has just been presented to us. We prioritized goal 14 and mapped an existing solution for the indicator 1411B. Then the Ghana Statistical Service, as the coordinator of the national stats system, brought in the Environmental Protection Agency, who are the country's custodian agency for goal 14 and have the mandate for reporting on 1411B. In terms of process, the Wilson Centre helped us to identify existing networks and data sets, and UNEP and GSS led various workshops around harmonising the methodology and the protocols to global standards, and also to determine whether any localization to the indicator was needed. This led us to using the Ocean Conservancy's International Coastal Cleanup Protocol, which specifies the GAZAMP guidelines and is described in UNEP's Oceans Manual. The protocol uses data collected from beach cleanups from civil society organizations like Smart Nature Freaks Youth Volunteers and Plastic Punch. We measure the number of plastic items per square kilometre of beach, which is a dimension of indicator 1411B, which is plastic debris density. Following an in-country validation process, Ghana became the first country ever to report on this beach litter dimension of 1411B, as well as this marking the first time Ghana has ever used citizen science data for country-level SDG reporting. Next slide. So a few of the lessons from this process include the importance of utilizing existing solutions. There were time and effort savings from using something that was off the shelf and already in existence, which meant that government agencies like GSS and EPA could rather focus on the processing and the validating of the data instead of the collection and the design. And likewise, the leveraging of existing networks meant that there were already citizens who were involved and committed to the environmental movement and didn't require additional effort in activation. As you can see from the logos along the top of the slide and the organizations named so far, this project's success is really a product of the strong data partnerships that were built around marine litter. I want to particularly mention UNEP, SDSN TReNDS, IIASA, and the Wilson Center and Ocean Conservancy for the roles they played. We found it important to create time and spaces for governments, international organizations, and civil society organizations to meet in order to build trust and ownership over the results. Next slide. So as part of the efforts, as I mentioned, Ghana was the first country to report on the beach litter dimension of 1411B. But moreover, we are proud that we are now going to be embedding this kind of data collection, this kind of citizen science beach cleanup data into our ongoing monitoring of marine plastic situations. So the Environmental Protection Agency are soon to convene a strategy meeting around how we institutionalize this data, and it will form part of Ghana's Oceans Plan, which is in development. And so we're really pleased that this isn't a one-off activity. This is something that is going to be embedded in our national data strategies. The details of the project can be found on Paris 21's data story around the work that we've been doing. We'll be submitting results around this as an article for publication sometime over the coming year. For other national stats offices that are wanting to realise the potential of citizen science for SDG monitoring, we're happy for you to reach out to Ghana and encourage contacts with the Global Citizen Science Partnership once it launches. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much. That's really interesting. It's a really great application. And I really liked in particular the, fostering the collaboration of the important communities on the ground, but also fostering collaboration across a host of supporting entities as well. So it is a very collaborative process. Sticking another minute with Ghana, I want to ask Kwame a quick question. What's your experience from the government side in working with the civil society community and as a government agency? And what benefits did this approach offer you? And was this data partnership you presented, could it be replicated, do you feel, by others? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Grant, and hello to everyone on the call and colleagues at Ben. All right, so thank you, Rachel, for that wonderful presentation. I think Rachel's presentation sort of answers a bit of the question you're asking me, though, but well, I could do a bit of emphasis on what has been said. So I think citizen science community presents a great opportunity for many government agencies such as us. I mean, the EPA working with the Statistical Service. Well, in our case, we would say that, of course, we are still at the early stages of exploring the value added to traditional or conventional forms of statistics, as has been mentioned already. But I think what is key to really highlight in this whole process is what this arrangement, using citizen science, to as a platform to fill in the gaps in terms of tracking and reporting on SDGs. What this does is it sort of helps us to build, those relationships, as has been said already. So we're looking at how, enhancing participation, collaboration, and of course, ensuring the contributions of non-governmental actors or non-government actors, which is very key. SDGs is for everyone, not just the governments of our countries. So if you can create that platform where you allow for others, besides government, like CSOs, volunteers, the academia, research institutes, and in our case, the University of Ghana, to also contribute in the production and ultimately the dissemination of this information. It allows for ownership and trust. It builds trust, and so that's what we are, realizing here from this work that we've done with all our global partners and local partners. That the approach also provides for us to also be able to relate whatever it is we're doing within the context of citizen science with existing benchmarks, of course, standards of measurement, which is a key concern of many people. How do we ensure that this is, standardized? And so within our experience, this is what we believe we can share. In terms of benefits, Rachel mentioned in 2017, where we did a roadmap. So basically that program sought to identify what we could report on and what we couldn't. But citizen science has sort of brought us a step closer to, especially the tier 2, tier 3 kinds of SDG indicators, where in terms of capacity and existing data was not really available. So this is where the benefit really is. And I'm happy to be on this call with everybody to talk about, how we've been able to use this to report and track on SDG 14.1. So this is a huge milestone for us, and it's cost effective. It allows for improvement in partnerships, and governments or countries can really benefit from this. I think this can be replicated elsewhere. Of course, we are still working on institutionalizing this relationship that we'll be able to put together in this program that allowed us to report on the SDG 14.1. So yes, this can be replicated, but we're happy to share more even beyond this call with other countries that are interested. Thank you.
Great, and thanks so much for that question. And I guess for those in the audience who want to find out more about this particular case study, you can just flip a message in the app to either Kwame, I guess, or Rachel, and find out more about their experiences and understand how they did generate a sort of this process to create sort of a legitimate set of information through this through citizen science. So thanks again. We're moving on. We've got 2 more panelists to go, and the question and answers keep coming in. Well, I guess there are actually some answers coming in as well as questions, which kind of surprised me. We're going to move back and think about citizen science a little bit more from a health perspective. And I'm going to turn it over to Steve now to give us some of his perspectives. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Good evening to everybody joining online. So what I'd like to quickly present this morning is some excerpts from a paper myself and a colleague published. And it's really about the idea, we've been talking a lot in recent years about data revolution. And we asked the question, what would a data revolution actually mean for us in the context of citizen science? And in particular, from an official statistics point of view, how would we incorporate citizen science into official statistics in a way that doesn't compromise the fundamental principles? This question really begins, for us at least, was when we left the last World Data Forum in Dubai. And at the end of every conference like this, we come out with a statement. And in that statement, we were basically saying we all agreed that we should partner with civil society, with the private sector, with academia. But of course, nobody said how we should do it, but the aspiration was there. And I guess we were thinking about this, and we were thinking, how do we, as official statisticians, capitalize on the intellectual capital that exists outside of our tent? And we were thinking back to science in general. And if you think to hear and burn, when Einstein wrote the theory of relativity, he wasn't a tenured professor. He wasn't the head of a physics department. He was a postal clerk. When Faraday or Darwin came up with their revolutionary theories, They weren't famous scientists. They were individuals who weren't considered scientists. So how were those theories, how was that knowledge embodied? And it was incorporated through accreditation. The systems existed where their ideas could be validated. And that's what led us to think, well, wouldn't it be revolutionary if we could set up a mechanism that we could validate citizen science in a way that we could use it? So instead of ignoring it, that we actually suck it into the system and we use it. The other reason that we were thinking about this, in the context of SDGs, while we've made tremendous progress towards developing indicators to measure the Sustainable Development Goals, we have a huge task ahead of us. So every December, the IIAG, the Interagency Expert Group, gives us an update on progress. And last December, there was still almost half of the indicators that we didn't have data for. Now, that's not to neglect the progress that we've made, but we're already 6 years into a 15-year program. So, you know, tick-tock, and the low-hanging fruit has been picked. So I would imagine the next set of indicators are going to be more challenging to develop. And yet we've seen that citizen science is telling us they already have data and they have methodologies. So why not start looking at that? So very simply, what we've proposed is a system to accredit statistics. Now, official statistics already uses unofficial data. So there's nothing new in that. So what we're actually talking about is now incorporating statistics. So in other words, if a citizen science has collected data, but also aggregated and applied theory to the data and actually have produced an indicator, how would we use that? And of course, official statisticians have two primary concerns. One is the general quality of the data, were they collected properly, and so forth. The second is motive. Are these data impartial, or were they collected to advocate for a particular agenda? And that's the most difficult piece to address, and that's our biggest concern. So the idea would be that we could establish a certification authority or authorities. This could either be at national level or at global level. We review the data, we peer review it, and we accredit it, and we say for the purposes of SDGs, this is fit for purpose. We can use these data, these statistics as indicators. And then basically they're put into the pool along with all of the other official statistics. And they either go into Tier 2 or Tier 1 depending on the assessment of the IAG. So it's a very, very simple idea. One of the main criticisms that we've got for this idea on the online platform is that how would this work for developing countries who are already struggling to do this? And in fact, this is possibly where the Global Citizen Science Partnership could play a really pivotal role, because prior to this, citizen science has been a fragmented community of different scientists around the world. The fact that they're now coming together as a partnership brings huge opportunities for them to explore now. Actually, they could become possibly an accreditation body themselves, or at least they could establish principles like the FAIR principles and so forth that would make our job as official statisticians a lot easier when we think about how to accredit these information. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and in fact, Steve, that's a great intervention, because we've had a few questions in the come up on this notion of how do we deal with issues of quality, and I think we might sort of pivot back to that a little bit in the Q&A at the end of this session. I think now we're going to hear from our last panelist, which is Dilek Fraisl. So Dilek, oh wait, sorry, I do have a question for Steve. Sorry about that. I'm throwing everybody off this morning.
Okay, Cameron.
Yeah, maybe just given that you're working in the WHO, and we're just trying to get a sense from you, perhaps. You know, will that institution be working with the global citizen science community? And have you seen any evidence of that in areas like the crisis like COVID-19 or SDG 3 or other health-related targets?
Yeah, thanks. So WHO is really keen to work with this partnership. we see enormous potential. I mean, there's so much potential that we can't actually articulate how large it is, because there's a vast array of data being produced. But yesterday at a session, I gave a really simple example. 2 weeks ago, the World Health Organization launched a new snakebite data platform, which combines GIS information, traditional statistics, and citizen science information, where we track the habitat of almost 300 venomous snakes. And people can also load up information of snake sightings, where they've seen them, and we have algorithms to validate those information. So we can track if the habitat is changing, and we can track what types of snakes we're seeing. We also link that then with another database that we're about to launch, which is a health facilities database. But in this app, you can see the health facilities in those regions and which health facilities have anti-venom and which types of anti-venom they have. And then you can also see statistics on snake bites in general and fatalities resulting from it. So it's a really nice combination of 3 different types of data being put together into a practical application. Full stop.
Great, thank you. All right, and now we'll pivot to Dilek, and I think she's going to give us a bit more information on this, the introduction of this partnership that is happening right now. So over to you, Dilek.
Thank you, Grant. It is wonderful to talk about the Global Citizen Science Partnership today after years of planning and preparation. And the UN World Data Forum actually has a very special meaning for the partnership, because as the global citizen science community and the members of it, we agreed to establish a task force to work on an incorporation model and a governance structure for the partnership at the UN World Data Forum in 2018 in Dubai, so which brought us to where we are today, where we're discussing the Global Citizen Science Partnership and its potential. So the GCSP, as Grant highlighted at the start, is a network of networks to promote and advance citizen science for a sustainable world. And the idea, actually, the GCSP was first launched or introduced during the 2017 UNEP Science Policy Business Forum as part of the UN Environment Assembly. And actually, the contributors of the GCSP currently have established an interim board to finalize the official incorporation and registration of the partnership as a legal entity hosted by the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis and registered in Austria. So actually, the incorporation, I would like to give you a little bit update on that. The incorporation is still ongoing, but we're very close to finalizing it, actually. But we still agreed to introduce the Global Citizen Science Partnership at the World Data Forum to you today, because we're ready to seek collaborations with the global data and statistics communities with you to fully realize the potential of citizen science data for SDG monitoring and implementation, as we've seen examples and heard examples of them today. So it's a great honor for me to talk about the partnership, to introduce the partnership, and I'd like to thank the interim board of the Global Citizen Science Partnership, as well as what came before that, meaning the planning committee and also the governance task group of the partnership, to put so much time and effort into making this work a reality, and for putting so much time into this. So these partners include business partners, regional citizen science associations from all around the world, UN agencies, research institutes, think tanks, and many, many others. And our community keeps growing, and we're proud of that. So what is this Global Citizen Science Partnership about, very briefly? So it's about networks. So it brings together the networks of citizen science researchers and practitioners to promote and advance citizen science for sustainable development. And it's about partnerships. It's because to fully realize the potential of citizen science, we need to coordinate, we need to mobilize action, and we need partnerships all around the globe and also in different domains and research areas and sectors. So the Global Citizen Science Partnership is also about collaborations with public, with citizens in scientific research, and it emphasizes collaborative intelligence and co-creation, as Albert highlighted at the start. And the GCSP is about sustainability because it aims to advance the use of citizen science to support sustainable development goals, but also the SDGs in general. So based on these main principles of these partnerships, we identified 5 foundational goals for ourselves at the Global Citizen Science community, and this has come up in different times in this session, as Jillian highlighted, as Steve highlighted. We would like to offer a coordinated point of entry for the governments, NGOs, business partners, national statistical offices, and the UN agencies, and many, many others that want to engage with the global citizen science community. And we want to help promote and support networks that advance citizen science, such as the regional citizen science associations, because we have already established in Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa associations, but we also want to help emerging networks on citizen science. And we also would like to help promote and support consortia of different citizen science projects conducting research on similar topics, such as marine litter that we've heard an example of today. And we heard that how important it is to standardize approaches collecting data on this issue, and many others as well. And we would like to support the collection, exchange of open, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And we also would like to realize the potential of citizen science to support sustainable development goals and also sustainable development more broadly. And I think as the partnership, we have been already involved in projects that aim to address these foundational goals. Some examples could be communities of practice that we established within the community, such as the SDGs and Citizen Science Maximization Group. But there's no time to get into details of that, so I would invite you to go to our website, globalcitizenscience.org, to learn more about these projects and many others. But what we want to do with this partnership is to do more of these things, more of these initiatives, global initiatives that we could work together with other communities to realize the potential of citizen science. But also, we would like to offer a place for everyone to work with citizen science. So I think, and also what is really important, we would like to do more of these use cases that we've heard in Ghana. So this spread these approaches to other countries, but also utilize citizen science for other probably SDG indicators and SDG areas and fields. So with that, I would like to say that if you are interested in also realizing the potential of citizen science for the SDGs, please get in touch with us. Please visit our website, globalcitizenscience.org, and get in touch with us using our email info at globalcitizenscience.org. We're ready to talk to you. We would like to work with you, so please get in touch. Thank you, Grant. Over to you.
Thanks, Dilek. That's great. And maybe just one quick follow-up question. Is there anything in particular, since you've got the floor and sort of the world data community listening to this session, are there anything in particular that you suggest the global data and stats community do if they want to work with this partnership? Is there something in particular you'd like to see them bring, or do you have any, can you expand a little bit on that, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Grant. As I mentioned, I think the first step would be to start talking, to create these data partnerships that, like we've heard in Ghana. So we just need to start talking to each other, understanding each other's gaps and needs in terms of data and other issues, and then try to identify where citizen science could actually help these communities to address these gaps. So it all starts with starting a conversation, a dialogue between these communities that could work together collaboratively. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. All right, so we have some time left for questions, which is really, really great because there has been some questions, and for those in the audience, I would encourage you to keep posting questions in this app if you're able to do that. I'm not quite sure, sorry, if there are actually questions in the room. So if there are questions on the room, someone is going to have to let me know if there are. But I think it might just be easier if everybody, even in the room, just kind of taps them into this app, because it's a lot easier to go through that. A couple of things that I'm going to sort of maybe just ask anyone to chip in on, maybe two issues. And so I'll give them to you both, and then I'll let people decide how they want to respond. You know, one of the things that's become really, really important to the global statistical community over the last decade is it's important of trying to pull together data from different sources to answer questions that have arisen. And I think COVID has provided tons and tons of case studies where information was sort of rapidly pulled together to respond to that crisis. We did have a question, for example, what are the advantages of combining Earth observation and citizen science to address the SDGs? But I think maybe more general from the panelist perspectives, how does citizen science connect or integrate or provide advantages by working with other data domains? You know, how do we show the value of citizen science not just by doing citizen science related data gathering and set up those collaborations, but what are the opportunities for combining that with other data sources, traditional and non? So maybe I'll get Dilek to start us off, and then if somebody can just wave their hand, like physically wave their hand on the panel who wants to jump in, that would be great. So we'll start with Dilek. I see someone's got a mic in their hand, but just hold off. Just wait a sec.
Thank you, Grant, and thanks for the question. It's a very nice question because while we were doing this research, Jillian was presenting, we were also interested in understanding how citizen science and Earth observation data can be combined or can be used together to address sustainable development-related issues. And we looked at the results of the EO for SDG initiative of GEO to find out what they found in terms of how how Earth observation could support SDG monitoring. And they identified that 29 of the SDG indicators could be monitored by Earth observation data. So we looked at these indicators in detail and found out that 24 of these indicators actually could be supported also using citizen science data. So citizen science could complement Earth observation data in many different ways, including, for instance, providing in-depth and nuance by providing institute data to be combined with Earth observation data. So there is a great potential for complementarity between these two data sources, for instance, but also in general traditional sources of data. So when we talk about citizen science, we're actually talking about using it as a complementary source of data for monitoring the SDGs and to complement traditional sources of data. Thank you.
Thanks. Does anyone else on the panel want to jump in on this issue of combining data?
Yeah, Cameron, if I could say quickly.
Sure.
It's the big challenge. I mean, maybe 10 years ago when everybody was talking about big data, the conversation around big data began as a new source and the kind of replacement source. And then very quickly we realized it was nothing of the sort. It was just another data source that we had to learn how to combine with traditional sources. And I think that's what we're going to have to do with all secondary data sources, whether it's citizen science or any other type. It's how to combine them so that the data sources complement each other. I think one of the big challenges, apart from quality, again, is also to assess the standards that have been applied. I mean, you want to be very careful around the efficacy, but also the principles that those data have been collected around. Like from a statistics office point of view, you don't want to get embroiled in a controversy where data have been collected and you find out those data have been collected in breach of basic kind of ethical principles, because then your reputation gets dragged into the mud. And I think that's the big challenge, and that's why it's great to see in the global partnership they're emphasizing the FAIR principles. I think that's really, really important, because that's how we can actually move this forward together.
Great, thanks. Jillian, did you want to jump in? Your hand was partially up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a couple of examples. I think the marine litter one, which Fraisl highlighted, is one example, and in biodiversity we also have examples where you have initiatives where data is being collected by the government. So you have the government wants to try to figure out what the concentration of beach litter is. I mean, this has happened in a number of places. Or the government is trying to do some species monitoring of select species in a particular country, in the case of biodiversity. They can only really do that periodically because it's very expensive and you have to send people out to remote areas, and maybe you choose specific areas to focus on, and so you then have this set of government data. And so what we have done in the marine litter context when I was with UNEP and now in the biodiversity context, it's the same idea. You take that information and then you can compare it to these citizen science databases. And you can say, okay, well, am I getting the same message from the citizen science data set that I'm getting from the government data set? How can I then, if I am getting the same message, how can then I use this other data set to fill these temporal and spatial gaps? And so it really is just about combining different sorts of information. And it is important, as was just mentioned by Steve, to still continue to have this in situ data collection, because it gives you those benchmarking points so that when you are creating a model or when you're looking to use other sorts of information, then you can validate it and double check. Thanks.
Great. Okay, everyone's nodding on the panel, so I think I'm going to pivot to the next question. And this is always the elephant in the room. I imagine this question is asked at every session at the World Data Forum. It seems to be a favorite, and it sort of evolves around funding and the prospects for funding. So I think Steve mentioned, examples like his snakebite database. So obviously there's funding around. Obviously there's a long history of citizen science more generally that's been supported. And obviously in the case of Ghana, you've seen quite a few different funding sources come together in order to make that particular project happen. Does anyone on the panel want to sort of just opine a little bit on the prospects for funding, or are there encouraging signs, discouraging signs? Where are we heading on from a funding perspective? Please raise your hand.
I'll go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Grant. I think the funding issue is important, and I think it's something we need to apply our minds to. It's not something that's just going to happen automatically. So I think it's critical. I want to just first of all emphasize that much of the work that's being done in terms of volunteer participation around citizen science initiatives is not hugely expensive. And I think one of our earlier panelists indicated it's an extremely cost-effective way of getting information, as long as the information that's being collected is appropriate and actually valuable at the end of the day. And there are many examples of broad-ranging atlasing projects that are being run by the biodiversity community, whether it's bird atlases or reptile atlases or frog atlases or whatever the case is. And much of that information has not been incorporated into thinking about how do we deal with some of the key biodiversity challenges that we're facing around the world. So a large chunk of this information comes from a volunteer base, is cheap, is very cost-effective, and frankly is going to be an awful lot cheaper than trying to do a formal survey for the kind of work that you're going to get the data for. So that's the one point, and let's keep that in mind. The second part of it is, of course, citizen science will involve structured and formal data collection processes at the same time. Many research institutions are involved in that. My perceptions thus far have been that there are many of the large funding agencies that are coming to grips with the power of citizen science and how it can add value to the work that's being done. And I think many of the large funding agencies, the European Commission, the National Science Foundation, and in the US through organizations like the Belmont Forum that are focusing on global initiatives, are starting to fund these kinds of initiatives. I think that the awareness is there, and I think it's up to the science community and the statistical community to tap into those resources and bring the funders on board. We're going to have to demonstrate the value by virtue of showing some return on investment for those people that are willing to put money on the table.
Great. Thanks so much. It's a great answer. I'm afraid we're not going to have time to get to the question for the person in the audience with the mic. So I would encourage that person to badger the people who are in person at this session. So the folks that are up on the stage to find out more. And so at this stage, with seconds to go, I'm going to start closing us down. First of all, I think on behalf of all of us in the audience, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their interventions today. Maybe a couple of specific thanks to Dilek for organizing this session and getting everything organized. I think it's been a very effective and a very informative one. I'd like to thank Steph, who's provided IT support from the East Coast of the United States this morning, so I had to get up very, very early to make this happen from our side, so thanks to Steph. And then I think just maybe two quick remarks that I'm going to sum up before they close us down. One, I think we've realized that there's an awful lot of interest, enthusiasm, and potential for SDG monitoring through citizen science, and I think we've really demonstrated that in this session today. And the second thing I wanted to quickly say is that this is a community that's obviously getting much more organized and developing the capacity to share experiences through the introduction of this global citizen science partnership. So I'd encourage you to find out more about the partnership, and I encourage you to keep your mind open and participate yourself in citizen science initiatives. So thanks to everyone, and we're going to sign it off here. All the best. Enjoy the rest of the forum.